Hi, my name is Janet Molbeck. I'm the Executive Director of Interweave. We're a small nonprofit here in New Jersey working to support spirituality for daily living, an integrated spirituality that nurtures wellness, the common good, and your spiritual life. Each year, we have a telethon. It's a way of keeping that work going. If you didn't have a chance to tune in, we hope you'll take advantage of this second opportunity. We want to thank you for supporting our work with 12 wonderful conversations about nurturing hope through prayer and practice, art and action. Thank you in advance for being there for Interweave and for the spiritual life in raising up the importance of hope. What we say here at Interweave is, let hope live in you. Thank you. Happy holiday. Hi, welcome back to our third conversation of 12 conversations that we're sharing with you today on the theme of nurturing hope through prayer and practice, art and action. And our guest for this hour is my good friend and colleague, um, Paul Keene. Paul Keene is the Associate Rector at Christ Church Short Hills, and our offices are very close. So I have the great joy of conversing with him and being with him and praying with him throughout the day. Paul is a multi-gifted person, uh, an Episcopal priest, but also a musician, someone with culinary gifts. I mean, I could just go on, and a deep, deep appreciation for the arts. And Paul brings the sensibility of art and joy to his ministry. And thank you, Paul, for joining us this morning and being with us during this hour in support of your conversation, which is we're going to talk about how the illumination of spirituality through art. How are you, Paul? Thank you for being with us this morning.
I'm doing well, Janet, and I'm so grateful to be with you today and appreciative of the invitation to be a part of this telethon in nurturing hope. I think we are certainly living in a time when we need to nurture hope. And spirituality is one of the best ways to do it. And I think art is one of the greatest ways to help nurture our spirituality, as you've put it, through the many ways that the arts allow us to illuminate it.
So I don't know if our technical host is able to pull this right up, but recently, they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And very recently, there's a beautiful welcome to Christ Church video. Um, I'm looking. I'm trying to. I can't see Chris, but I can. He can hear me. um. So, Chris, do you think that you could play the welcome to Christ, the new welcome to Christ Church Short Hills video for us?
Yes, give me just 30 seconds to pull it up.
30 seconds. And so I'll talk more about why we are um playing this and on the other side, as they say, but um I just the environ which we have the privilege to be working every day is amazing. And I think when you see this video, you'll feel it. Um, and also you'll see Paul in his what's the word I'm looking for?
Element, perhaps?
His element. Paul in his element. I love your chair. Tell us
Thank
about.
you. I had this prayer stall made when I was still living in Boston, and I modeled it after the prayer, the stall that I would sit in as the director of music at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Cambridge, because I just got so comfortable in it, and I wanted one for home. And so I found a woodworker who modeled this after it, and so now it's my prayer stall. Wherever I'm at, wherever I'm living, and a little bit of St. Peter's that I can take with me.
I
Um,
love that. And I see your gorgeous icons right above.
yeah,
And it's really it's important to have a space where you can that's identified. And that's such a good, I mean, we're talking all day about practices and prayer and practice through prayer and practice, a way to, and here is the video. So we'll talk on the other side.
it's a
It's
good video.
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful video. And it it makes you feel like you want to go to church. It makes you feel like it draw, the reason, we're living in a time after the pandemic, obviously, um, church attendance, temple attendance, mosque attendance, people were shut off from church, numbers fell, and people are slowly rebuilding presence. Um and this video is so artistically done that it invites people into this space. I mean, you feel so welcomed and held, and it's so inviting. You want to be there. It's really a great um, model of how we can use art to invite. We began talking about hospitality this morning, and so I don't know your thoughts. I mean, you play very prominently. I love when you hold up the host. I'm very touched every time I see it by this
Well, I think that we,
invitation.
I think that invitation, hospitality. I think one of the realities of art that sometimes that's maybe less talked about or less understood is that art's intrinsically about hospitality. And it's vulnerable. You have an artist who creates and then offers it to the world, and in offering it to the world, they invite the world to participate in it. They invite the world to perceive. They invite the world to reflect. And I think when you take something like videography, which is a modern art form, and you ask somebody similar to a photographer, right, to capture moments in life and to tie them together to create a narrative of a day. And that's what that video does so very well. That's the narrative of what happens on a Sunday morning at Christ Church in Short Hills, from coming to the doors to myself and Bowie and other who are preparing for ministry in the liturgies of the Sunday, to people coming together to be in fellowship, to learning, to worshiping, to eating and talking, and all of that happens. And the videographer, to pull that together in such a beautiful way that captures not just what's happening, but the feeling, the joy, the invitation, that is artful. As you said, it's artistic. And a videographer in this case is they ever endeavor to be, are being artistic because they're inviting people to glimpse something of the moment that they've captured. Um,
It's interesting. Of course, we're using, I know while we're on the subject, we just finished having a conversation, and inevitably, the last hour kind of affects the next hour. And we were talking about how technology can, what's our relationship to it? Can we befriend it, as it were, to help us rather than to be a hindrance to our humanity, to our spirituality, to our core? And so during the pandemic, we were shut off, and there was no way of getting in touch with going to church, etc. And you were part of a in a particular ministry. Was it digital worship during that time? Can you tell
Yeah,
us?
I mean, that's what I like to call. I think it's what all of us kind of came to call it, but the term I fell upon was digitally mediated worship. Because we worship in all sorts of manners. But when I was serving at St. Peter's, was when we entered the pandemic. It's hard to do choir when you're not together. And we were endeavoring, as everybody was, to figure out how to still gather, even while we were in dispersion, right? We were all secluded into our particular homes. But the worship and the needs of what we do together was still important, and we needed to find ways to do it. And so what I did at St. Peter's was we used Zoom, to be honest, initially Google Meets, but then Zoom. And what I found as we were undergoing that experiment together was that one of the things that was missing in worshiping through digital mediation was the sense of shared space. And the initial excitement of being able to look into one another's homes and screens to see where people were was exciting and wonderful because we got glimpses into each other's life. But we didn't have that sense of the shared space that our worshiping communities have historically built up together. We didn't have the church or the synagogue or the mosque. We didn't have the language of the architecture and the arts that build it up. And so one of the things that I started doing was trying to figure out how we could make that. And I stumbled upon using PowerPoint. And in the Christian liturgical traditions of the more Catholic persuasion, of which the Episcopal Church is a part, we have colors that help us denote season. And right now we're in the season of Advent, and churches in the Episcopal, Anglican, Lutheran, Catholic, all of us are using purple or maybe a blue to help denote that we're in the season of Advent. But when we were worshiping alone and in our homes, we didn't have that kind of color language to help us note it. We didn't have the windows. But with PowerPoint, I could create themes that used those colors and helped us see that we're together in the season of Advent or Christmas or Epiphany. And then I also was able to start including art from all over history, modern to Renaissance to medieval. And I started using it to help break up the monotony of just, boxes on a screen. Like there's good use for it. And we would definitely have that be a part of the service. But when we were hearing readings, I wanted us to be able to focus together in a space, even a digital space, to help kind of center our communal praying with one another, our communal hearing with one another, because scripture is already art. Let's be honest. Like you don't get the writings that any of our traditions hold to as holy without having the phenomenal art that went into creating them. And those texts have gone on to inspire many, many artists to share. And so, we didn't have the stained glass windows, but we got to travel to the greatest moments in history and look at Italian Renaissance art to modern Cubist, productions, to using icons to help inspire our imagination, which is what our spaces do. And so it's one thing that really, for myself, helped me move from my background in performing arts, from music and theater, into a more visual focused art for a while, and learning a lot of different visual languages and styles to help kind of keep us moving and keep things dynamic in the pandemic, where it was very we were definitely in need of things to hope for, and definitely feeling the weariness of the world and the trials there. But also to help us share in that communal space, even if it was a created, temporary, and digital space.
So is it and again, is it a both and? Because at the same time, we had this benefit that we learned that that technology could be a doorway to the sacred. And then we wanted people, we're inviting people with uh, an artistic welcoming video like you created at Christchurch to come back into the physical space. How do you hold those two? How do you see those two realities side by side? Um, because I love that we can, um, that you were able to offer the sacred online to people through digital art. Um, but at the same time, the different experience of coming into the physical church. How do you hold those things in yourself together, side by side? How do you see them?
I think we have to be honest and say that they are different, right? They do different things and they do similar things, but I think we have to be honest to say that they do different things. They're as much as we, I think, have been exploring a new experiment, which is the experiment of hybridity, to say some of us are going to be here together and some of us are going to be apart but joining in. Um, I think it's hard to do that both and, because that both and is saying that they are similar but not as different as they actually are. What do I mean by that? I mean that when you're together with people in a place, you feel them. You can feel their presence, even if we're not speaking. You can feel their breath. We can breathe together. It's really hard to breathe together when you're in a remote capacity, though the technology has gotten really quite phenomenal in getting us closer to being able to do it. But that aspect of presence has changed. we're together in a different way. And there are certain things I think we're able to do when we choose to operate in one mode predominantly over the other mode. So whether we choose to be together in a physical, place, or whether we choose to be together in a virtual place or digital mediated space, because you can use different tools. It takes a lot of coordinating. I think it is possible, but the coordination has to be really quite practiced. And that's another aspect of this, which is whether we worship in person or we worship digitally, our capacity to worship in those ways increases when we practice it. And one of the things, about the both and is that we haven't quite found the way, I think, to practice well hybrid worship in a sense that allows people to be fully present in whichever mode they're coming, but also participating fully. For instance, maybe you have a lot of people joining remotely, but is there something that is unique for them to experience that acknowledges their remote viewing? Whereas people who are worshiping in person have the tactility of being able to pick up the hymnal or pick up or shake hands at a piece or an exchange, or receive even the sacrament of communion if that's like the sort of worship that's happening. Whereas our remote attendees, what are we doing to have them have some kind of similar experience? It's a possible thing, but I think it's difficult. And I think the way we can get there is we have to first acknowledge the ends are similar, but the means are different.
It's so interesting because in both cases you're trying to you what you were talking about, the way you did digital worship during that time, you're still trying to pull people in, you're still trying to uncover the sacred. um I'm going to take a minute because I don't want to lose the opportunity to ask you about something that you are bringing to Christ Church, some good news that you will be bringing to Christ Church Short Hills, I believe in March. That certainly is an example of illuminating the spiritual through art. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What that good news is?
Yeah, very happily. Come March, Christchurch is going to be hosting the sixth volume of the St. John's Bible, which is an illuminated and handwritten Bible. The first one made in good couple thousand years, good couple, at least hundreds of years. It put together by Benedictine monks or commissioned by the Benedictine monks of St. John's Abbey, of the same ones who are part of St. John's University in Collegeville, Minnesota. And this illuminated Bible, and handwritten Bible just is one of the most magnificent pieces of art, I think, in our era, particularly in what its mission is, which is simply to spark the imagination and rekindle our love for Holy Scripture. This has particular beautiful handwritten scripts throughout. It's in 7 volumes. Each of the volumes is probably about as big as my chair that I'm sitting in, to be honest. And when you open it up, it has these moments as you read through the Bible that you'll turn the page and there'll be an entire illumination, an entire, hand done picture with all of these motifs and gold foil and painting and vibrant colors that just brings the scriptures to life. And we've already started using it at Christ Church to kind of get our own excitement about it. We've been using images from the St. John's Bible for our bulletin covers right now. In fact, the cover for this Sunday's bulletin is one of my favorite pieces in the St. John's Bible, which is the cover folio for the Gospel according to Mark. which shows John the Baptist just after Jesus is baptized in the Jordan. Um, and I don't know, Chris, if you have it, if you could maybe pull that image up. But this is the opening pages in the sixth volume of the St. John's Bible. And we have, the Gospel according to Mark, which is the full name of that gospel account. And right next to it, we see John the Baptist walking away and this field of reeds, and then the Jordan River. And then we see a golden figure, which is the Christ, having just been baptized, with angels and all flocking around, and God seemingly splitting the heavens. And all of the art in the St. John's Bible, whether it's a big piece like this that covers a page, and I mean, like, it's like this piece of art is like a good 2 feet, tall, and a good, foot and a half wide. I mean, it's magnificent. Um, are this detailed, and I have to be honest, this is one of those things you're talking about, the both and of digital capacity, of like digital capacity versus in-person capacity, because one of the things that we don't get to see so well in the digital image is that the gold figure is gold, like really made out of gold foil, and those angels are gold, and just these kind of vibrancy on the page that material qualities from an artistic perspective brings, and that we could kind of feel and touch. And that's one of the great things that I'm really excited about having this volume, which is the volume that covers the gospel accounts and acts, is that they want you to touch the book. They want you to turn the pages. They want you to be able to feel the brushstrokes in the art. And part of it is just one of these most phenomenal reminders that, um, the scriptures were written divinely inspired, but written by human hands. And one of the things I think we lose in printing is that we don't see the individual strokes of the letter that bring us back to that breath that we share. And something like the St. John's Bible, which took years and years and years to pull together, and so many different hands and so many different artists and binders and page makers and just craftspeople and artisans to put these books together, for the world to be invited to engage with and to pray with. And that's what these do. You're invited to not just to read the scripture, but to feel the scripture and to imagine the people who copied it out, which bring us back to the people who originally penned it. As much as we're invited to dive into the art and see how it would spark our spirits in deeper prayer. I was telling Janet and I were talking about this earlier, and I just, this piece of art here, just the fact that John the Baptist is walking away while Jesus, is back in the background there with all of heaven and all the crowds around him. And it immediately to me brings to mind what John says, is that I must decrease so that he would increase. And we see that the artist, I think it's Donald Jackson, has displayed that visually. And using these old medieval techniques, the fact that John is actually leaving the frame, his feet are outside of the frame of the
Wow.
image, helps to remind us that he's going out. And doesn't it invite us to imagine how we're to perhaps go out? I think there's all of these different things, and that's my interpretation, but it invites all of our interpretations. Thank you, Christopher, for showing it. It's just
That was amazing. And you do, it's such an interesting experience to look at, just even to look at that page, even though we're not, you want to touch it. You want to see it. You want to experience it firsthand. And I one of the things that's interesting to me about this is, you think of the illuminated manuscripts that the monks copiously put in gold. When you talk about the gold, the idea that in our day, that in the present day, we could in that get into that stream of making the word be seen in the modern day. There's a kinship somehow. When I look at it, I almost am startled um to see a modern day illumination. How does that what are your thoughts about that? You know what they talk about that, Paul?
Yeah, well, it's a fantastic thing that we're doing because one of the things that we have to grapple with is as much as I love Renaissance art and my background in performing arts is early, so 1200s to like 1700s is my too big of a period to perform, but that was like the period I studied. You look at art from it, and what are you going to see? Who is represented in most of that art? It's European white people, right? And one of the things that you see in a modern illumination, as you would see in any religious modern art in so many different cultures coming, is you see representation done differently. I think about immediately one of the earliest illuminations in the St. John's Bible is from the third chapter of Genesis, and it shows the fall, but it depicts Adam and Eve and a serpent. And the depiction that they chose in depicting Adam and Eve are two people of very evident African and tribal descent, right? So where else would you see that before the modern era right now, where people would have acknowledged the scientific, understanding of where humanity was born, and to choose to say this is going to be how we depict Adam and Eve because we want to tie into our what blessings God has given us and our modern understanding, looking back through the eons. Or there's this other art where they use the DNA motif, in the gold, like DNA motif, I think in the
Hmm.
gospel according to John, which is, talking about the word was made flesh. And they put this DNA motif around this depiction of the light being, made into to manifest. I mean, so you get these aspects that can only happen today, really, with modern understanding and modern learning, to illuminate the same scriptures that we have held for thousands of years, um, and bring in the knowing that we have developed over time in our study of them, over time in our gifted inspiration by the Holy Spirit still today. Um, and by the many different studies that we've had. I mean, one of the most beautiful things, I was serving at St. Luke's in Darien, Connecticut for a couple of years, and they have all 7 volumes at their church. And so they have lent out, the first volume, which covers the Torah and the Pentateuch, to synagogues and to other communities, because they also, our Jewish siblings hold the same scriptures that we do, in the Hebrew scriptures, and to be able to engage with it from that the St. John's Bible works in such a way because of the translation they chose, which is the New Revised Standard Version, um, but also in their conversations with other people and other scholars, in an interfaith, in an ecumenical manner, is really fascinating and amazing because it's designed to bring anybody into its study and engagement and conversation. But I also want to, emphasize that the brothers of St. John's Abbey, they chose not for themselves to do it, but they chose to commission renowned calligraphers and artists to make it. And this is another part of art, that I want to emphasize here because uh, I think it's an invitation that we have as worshiping communities is to invite artists who may or may not share our faith and perspective to offer their God-given skills in a way that is beautiful and that helps to illuminate our faith by sharing their phenomenal skill set. And this has always been the way that we have kind of gotten our arts made. But sometimes I think that we kind of lose sight of is who who is the artist who can do it? Does it have to be somebody from within, or can it be somebody who is, from other places, and their participation in making something that inspires holiness? Because what they do is already phenomenal, and
Ready?
and God-given.
We just this week, we of course were witnessing the reopening of Notre Dame and the many artisans, and I'm sure I'm guessing we're not necessarily of that faith who came together to renew and restore a place that the whole world was longing to have restored. Just even the energy of that regard, regardless of what part of the world you were from, where you worship, people seem to have this deep connection with um, the restoration of this cathedral.
Right. And that they did it in what, 5 years, right? So I
Incredible.
mean, it's incredible because the cathedral took hundreds of years to make, generations on generations on generations. There are multiple styles and architectural languages that made up Notre Dame before, and now that make it up today. And I think cathedrals are such a perfect example of the arts coming together to inspire hope and to illuminate something. They are um, they're our endeavoring to participate in God's artistry. God created, everything that is, and did it beautifully. And the project of creating something like a cathedral is an endeavoring to help draw our attention to God's beautiful magnificence, and in creating, like, the ceilings of these big spaces are so high because they're supposed to make us imagine the heavens. You know, and we see that in Notre Dame, and we see it, in this new modern retelling of a classic, um, and and in a way that we had never seen it before. I remember when I first saw the pictures of just how bright the space is now, and just washing away the soot and the gray, and now it's kind of almost pristine white, in a way that just is like glowing. And it has this, still the tale of its, many centuries that it's from, but now it has, these modern, and even postmodern, chairs up at the front, and it has this font that is this beautiful font with a paralleled altar that looks just like the font. Uh, and that tells a story. It tells the story that's ever been, but that you get to that table through the waters of baptism, and it doesn't let you lose sight of it. And it's still in this space that's so traditional, and that's still that we're reminded is ours.
We need places that inspire. It's interesting to remember that in those, you know, those times, if we were to go back to medieval times, it wasn't just the nobility that came into the cathedral. They were built because to inspire the poor, the ailing, the sick. They walked in and they saw something beyond that was, in fact, nurturing hope. And we are here trying to nurture hope in a world also that can feel oppressive. And so I just want to turn a little bit because you mentioned your history in terms of your studies. And at a certain point, I think when you were working in your on your doctoral work or in your thesis, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, there was you sort of were, I'm going to let you explain it like you explained the good news. We're looking at things through um, the lens of kind of an improvisational approach to performance. And we had a wonderful conversation about this earlier in the week. And so I just want you to tell us about that a little bit, because there's something about it that has a message, I think, that's important, because the arts are not just something we receive. We're asked to take part. So can you tell us about that work that you did that will help us to enter that conversation?
Yeah, so that was part of my master's thesis. I have a lot of degrees, but a doctorate, not yet.
I,
So
I promoted you. We're promoted.
yeah. One of the things that I have found in performance theory and performing arts is that that performance isn't owned by the performer. I think that can be a really easy kind of idea, because we think about, like, oh, the actor, and the auteur or whatever, but the reality is that performance, whether it's static performance, and I think that art performs. I don't think you can look at a piece of art, like, the Mona Lisa, you can't look at it and say it doesn't perform. But the performance isn't owned by it. The performance isn't owned by me. The performance isn't owned by the preacher. It's owned by everybody who's involved, and that includes the audience. So the audience are part of the performing. Their part might be predominantly receptive, but their receiving what is happening is part of what makes it real and tangible. One of the things that we see in performance is one, communication first and foremost, and two is an endeavor to evoke emotion of some sort. And when you think about performance, when anybody thinks about performance, we can quickly identify performances that we like, performances that we dislike. We can identify performances that we believe are good, and we can identify performances we believe are bad. I'm going to put, what we like and dislike to one side, because that's a matter of taste. And there's a lot that goes into taste, and taste is brilliant and wonderful and a whole conversation worth having. But I want to focus instead on the other part of this, which is the idea of good and bad performance. Because one of the things that we consistently will find in our shared aspect of performing is that good performance are those that are real, and bad performances are those that we can identify as fake. And there's something so fantastically alive in that. Because when I think about performance in a context of spirituality or worship, it can feel like a bad thing to say, because we tend to immediately go to, well, if it's performance, it's not real. But when you see something that is art and it makes you cry, and it makes you feel something, that those tears are real. That emotion that you feel is real. And part of why you feel it is that the performer, whether it be a piece of art or somebody on the stage or somebody singing, they have evoked something real in themselves to share. And that sharing, that connection, that communication is the goal of performance. It's not to create something false, but it's to create something very real. And what we do in worship, what we do in coming together, isn't performative, but there is a performance quality. And part of that performance quality is to find a realness and to point out and draw our attention to something that is real. And in the sense of worship, that's God. In the sense of the different ways we worship, it's part of our working together to make ourselves aware of a very real person, in the case of Christianity, who is among us and who we worship and give thanks to, who it's really easy to lose sight of, especially in a world where things are difficult, right? Where there's a lot of hopelessness. And yet we come together and we perform songs of thanksgiving and praise in the midst of trial, to remind ourselves of the realness of the hope that God has given. We build cathedrals in swamps that otherwise might sink, that otherwise might be places of danger, to remind us of the safeties that God promises us, and to remind us of the beauty that's in the swamp, that there's beauty there too. Um, and so this idea of performance and where it takes place and how it takes place, that it requires a whole group of people. There's no such thing as performance when nobody's around, right? If it's not perceived, it's not performance. At least I don't think it is. You need somebody else there.
Well,
And we should also
we're both
singers.
singers, we're both performers, and in different ways, but we're definitely both singers. And what you said about that it's real is really extraordinary, because you can have a live, I mean, like a recorded, perfect singing performance, right? That's get you receive it, it's perfect. But what I find is if someone, you're in a cafe or a restaurant and someone sings and it's imperfect, but it's so real and it's so heart given and so heartfelt, something happens. It's something happens. There's an exchange um, that is real, that can be sacred. And it's not about the perfection. It's about that human gift, something given, something received. Yes, and that sounds a lot. Um, that has an echo of Eucharist for me.
Yeah, I think it does. And I think part of it is that we, as much as we think we like the idea of perfection, um, we actually get really bored with it. We get really bored with perfection. And it's part of it's that we like the risk that comes with the idea of a mistake might be made. But being more charitable and perhaps more genuine, I think it's because we realize that we're not perfect. And there's something really marvelous when we see somebody being able to overcome imperfections, or willing to be imperfect and be honest and genuine with us. And that's part of what live performance does, is there is the real possibility that it's going to not be perfect, and that's what makes it beautiful. And one of the things that I always remember, and perhaps here is for me one of the greatest gifts, and where I see hope illuminated through art, is that God created a world, but nowhere, at least in Genesis, when we hear about God's creating the world, does God say that this was made perfect? God said it was made good. And we are given a world where we see plants that have specks, and we see, striped zebras whose stripes are not perfect. We ourselves can look in the mirror and see all of the ways that we're not perfect. And part of, I think, our living into this world with grace is seeing the wonders and the beauty that comes with imperfection, and why God said that that's good.
So my illuminator of art, what if you had to give me in a word or a sentence, what is something that gives you hope in this world, that is illuminating hope for you in this
I,
world that is struggling to be born, as it were?
that we're still doing art, that we haven't let the weariness of this world stop us from making art. In fact, it's the weariness of the world that sometimes gives us the greatest art that ever was, that ever has been. And let me be clear what I mean by that. I don't just mean the fine art. I mean, the people who quilt the banner for the church that gets used every Sunday. I mean, the people who write in calligraphy to send their friend a card to say get well, rather than buying Hallmark. I also mean Hallmark, that we still make beautiful Hallmark cards with all of their corniness, and their wonders, because I think that's art too. And part of this is just getting in touch with ourselves and with one another, and that we still do it. Um, to me, that's evidence of God's love for us. And our picking up God's invitation to participate with the Holy One in creating beauty and endeavoring to show why this world is still beautiful, even when things are going poorly or things seemed all messed up. And that to me is hopeful because it's a reminder that we actually still do have many ways to make this world what God intends.
Thank you, Paul, for illuminating spirituality through art and this conversation about art, and for being here to share with us today and to help us to nurture hope. I feel hopeful when I talk to you, Paul. Thank you, my friend.
You're very welcome, and thank you again for the invitation. It's been an honest pleasure.